You landed a job after a couple of months, and that went really, really well until you had an incident at work, which kind of changed the whole environment for you, right?
I made a mistake with an account. It wasn't a major account, but I laid it on the table, told them what was what, and that was something that backfired. I knew I worked incredibly hard for that company up until that time, and I had the receipt. And this is kind of how quickly people can now find you less valuable. It was incredibly hard work. I was overcompensating for the fact that I didn't have a degree. I would make sure that I knew everything better than anybody else. Nobody, like I said, gave me anything. I worked really hard to make sure that I did qualify on the things that mattered. And so I made having a bachelor's degree irrelevant. I live in the Netherlands. So I grew up in a very white society. And one of the things that became way more apparent to me when I went to school was how different I then was to the norm in the school, which were white kids. I felt a lot out of place in the beginning.
Despite you getting the right results, that person still said, no, I want to put you back or hold you back because other people who look like you will be at that lower level.
We have a system here in the Netherlands that up until the age of 12, you go to secondary school around about, then you do this test. And this test is going to determine what your next steps are going to be.
And welcome to another episode of Everyday Leadership. And today I have someone who is a banker, turned management consultant, who's founded 2 companies, sold those companies, someone who has worked with a myriad of clientele in Middle East, Africa, US, Europe. Someone who is currently nominated and hopefully wins like top 150 of the world's most influential and innovative and entrepreneurs who's shaping the future. And her journey to get into where she's got to is one that I know has definitely not been easy for sure. And I'm looking forward to having that conversation today. I have the pleasure of talking to Kimberly Ofori. How are you doing?
Wow. Well, with this introduction, I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. And I always say that, people have amazing bios and histories. But I'm always curious, who's the person behind all those different things I mentioned? Who is Kimberly to the world when you share your journey and your story to people and you announce yourself to other people?
Right. So, loaded question, I think layered question. And I hope that we get to that point as well. But it's also, I think, an answer that evolves over time, right? So the person I was 10 or 15 years ago, longer when I started as a banker, it's not the same person that's sitting in front of you today. But I was born and raised in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, to my Suriname mother and my Ghanaian father. Suriname, for those who don't know, is a small country in South America. Yeah, pretty traditional upbringing. I always loved to sing, went to church, spent a lot of time playing outside with my brother. He had to take me outside. We played a lot of football and soccer and all of those really boys things. And then, yeah, grew up in the Netherlands, the Dutch school system. Had a lot of interesting experiences that I think shaped also the way that I make decisions today, but we'll probably touch on that later. But yeah, started working very early on. So I did a bit of corporate, I did a bit of entrepreneurship, and that's kind of where I kept in the realms of the space that I am still in today.
So when you talk about the experiences that shaped you, especially as a young person, if I even go further back, a younger you, first 10 years of your life, what were you like? You talked about loving to sing, going out playing football with your brother. What were you like as a person then?
I think I was, in a way, of what I've been told, a very young version of me was very bold and mouthy. So I was very opinionated, and I had things to say. Started changing when I started going to school, really. And so so at a very young age, so from the year 4 or 5, I started to become a bit more reserved, very observant. I also usually tell people that I identify more as an introvert than anything else. Some people may want to call me an ambivert. And it's something that's really stuck with me. I think as a person, people usually, the first impression is I'm very calm and collected. I don't show my full self in the first impressions. People have that impression of me. But I'm also the kind of the geeky one in the group chat, right? I'm always the one with the jokes. Always the one who is very extra in that sense when I'm comfortable. So I definitely have multiple sides of me. I love to be creative, but I'm also very analytical. So I feel like I have this. I now love this kind of balance, but this really interesting balance between being very creative and kind of thinking big and bold, and also being somebody also really looks at details in life, but also in relationships and the things that I do.
It's it's never tough straddling both worlds, and I'm speaking from experience because I have both that creative side to me, but also the analytical, chartered accountant background, all that kind of stuff. And I know there are times when you're having conversations with people and you're straddling both worlds, and you can sometimes feel like you don't belong in either sometimes.
Right.
And it's quite hard to sometimes even just, I can see when you say how you don't easily present your full self all at once, because there's that part of you that's like, I'm not necessarily sure. Let me test the water. Let me see what this person's really like. So what was it like navigating that and having both of those two, I'm going to call it personalities, those two sides, in a world where a lot of times people are just either one or the other one as well?
And I question that part, right? There's something that I recently also wrote about where I feel like, yes, we are trained and conditioned to kind of decide what kind of person we are very early on in school, and kind of society makes you want to have to choose. But there's really so many sides to everyone, right? We're all of us, we're more than just one thing. So I think that's kind of in the foundation of things. I think we all have way more in common with in that than we have than we don't. I think some people are more in tune with one side than they may be with another, but that's a different conversation. And so for me, it's always been a journey, and it still is a journey. I think if you're looking at the early kind of young banker Kimberly, I was incredibly insecure, but I was also looking back, I was probably made insecure or made to feel insecure because I wasn't as vocal as others. And I wasn't as out there and visibly competitive as others in an environment where you're supposed to be. And I tie that back to thinking way back in school when my teachers used to say, you're so bright, you're so smart, you're all of these things, but you need to speak up more. You need to show yourself more, and you need to do all of these things more, right? You need to be more. And so I always felt like that was something, a part of me that I lacked. There was a part that I lacked, and therefore I had to compensate that with doing exceptional work, right? And so later on in my career, I learned that, hey, my ability to deliver great work while still not being that person other people said I was supposed to do is working. But I can still be that person sometimes, and be outspoken when I want to be. So I've become known as this person, and this also kind of become my tagline that I speak when I have something to say, right? And it's very personal to me because I think that a lot of the times people and society try to push you into doing things on their terms and in their context when it doesn't feel natural to you. So going back to your question, I think that I show different parts of myself in environments where that's relevant or where I feel comfortable to do so.
So when I hear you say that, one of the things that you just touched on was 10-year-old you was bold, outspoken. That's what your parents and people around you told you. And then you go into school and your teachers are telling you you're smart, you're bright, but you need to speak up. What was it that happened and shifted when you went to secondary school that, I guess, removed your voice in a sense and made you not speak up as much as you were pre that experience?
Well, I didn't realize this until later, but I'm now connecting the dots. But one of the things that happened is you have to understand in context. I grew up in a very white, I live in the Netherlands. So I grew up in a very white society. And one of the things that became way more apparent to me when I went to school was how different I then was to the norm in the school, which were white kids. And so I felt a lot out of place in the beginning. I wasn't sure how to navigate this environment where now all of a sudden I could see that I was different, but I was always constantly made aware of the fact that I was different. And it wasn't said in a way that it would make me feel special, right? It was really a very uncomfortable reality, and people kind of pinpointing that out to you in the way that either the teachers treated you differently, negatively, or your peers. And so I became very reserved because I was uncomfortable and I wasn't sure how to identify or position myself in this environment that I honestly, looking back, didn't feel safe.
Yeah, I can see how. I think a lot of times we talk about the system and how easily the system can begin to chip at someone's personality and shape them both consciously and subconsciously. And there are times when it can be as in your face, whether it's the students or the teachers, but then there are times when it's that internal questions that we have for ourselves that, especially when you're young, you're still trying to figure things out, that also can begin to have a massive impact. But then I look at your journey and you started working when you were 14. And then eventually you left and moved into a different a career at 16. But when you're working at 14 and you're in that working environment, how much of that boldness and that confidence was coming out? Because even at such a young age, to be in that environment that you're navigating, it's still not easy. So there must have been an element to, despite what you're going through at secondary school, that you're like, no, I can still do this. I can still have a voice. I can still speak to people and step into this.
You know what? And I think, there's only so many legal jobs you can do at the age of 14. So when I think let's take the word work very relatively here. But I did after school work, and I worked in a bookshop, and I did kind of the paper rounds, and I worked in a restaurant, and I did all of these little side gigs until the age of 16, where then you were allowed to do something a bit more with more responsibility. Um, you know what? It was circumstances more so than it was a push internally. At the time, I wanted to contribute to the household where when I saw that we needed it most. And I felt that I could take maybe a gap year and then work, bring in some money, put some, have some relief in the house, and then go back to school. So I didn't really see it as a big deal at the time to step out and say, I'm going to take on this responsibility to actually get a job. And I had been working at this insurance company for some time now on the phone. They had allowed me to do some crazy evening hour shift at the insurance company. And then when I realized that I could earn a bit more if I also kind of spent more time during the day and actually qualified to be an advisor, I talked my way into letting them give me some kind of certification. And this was really my idea to just do it for a year, contribute where I could, and then go back to school. And that turned out to be an entirely different adventure because I learned that while on the job, I learned so much more about me, about what I was capable of. It started with the fact that I was able to get certificates and become an insurance advisor. So now I have other credentials outside of school that are of value. This is a whole new world for me, where in the Suriname culture, well, your grandma will say, and your mother also says, like your degree is your first husband, right? So for me, it was not a thing to also have something of value created outside of school at that age. So for me to come into that world of professional certification and skill building, that was an eye-opener for me. And I felt really empowered at the time because it gave me back control. And the reason why, and I think this is important for context, is that so we have a system here in the Netherlands that up until the age of 12, you go to secondary school around about, then you do this test. And this test is going to determine what your next steps are going to be. And so I did this test and I scored one of the highest marks in the school, not in the school, but that you can have in the test that kind of categorizes you for a university track. Let's put it that way for simple terms. And I think that hearing that as a 12-year-old, it's obviously that's devastating. And you cannot begin to comprehend the impact it will have on you later, right at that time. But you know that it's profound. You feel it, you sense it. There's something there that's just so unjust about it. And there were other teachers who kind of like were not for it, but it went how it went. And from the house, I was told, just do your job, show them that you're good, and it's gonna be fine. But so in that context, right, I'm already now in school, dragging my feet, feeling incredibly also insecure about myself. Like, oh, maybe I am not good enough to do great things and to go to these kind of schools and do all of these things. And so you're starting off this new chapter of your life, feeling that and still having the pressure to perform, because I also have a Ghanaian father who had ordained me to be a lawyer by birth, right? So I'm now thinking, this is going to significantly slow me down for this lawyer track, right? So there's all of these things going on in my young mind. So bringing me back to the 60-year-old who now all of a sudden has control over how well she does at work, and that I can actually control how fast I get promoted, or how people perceive me, and I could actually show that I was smart and intelligent. That was very empowering.
When you look at that journey, finally step into something that you feel empowered, I always think that it's interesting. There are things where we can easily skip over in our journey, because even you landing that role at 16, I'm sure you would needed some certification and bits and pieces to actually get qualified to be able to do that. There was still a confidence and a boldness for you to speak up and get to the point where you can actually earn those certificates. So even despite the environment you had come from, there was something in you like, I'm still going to do this. So I'm still going to push and be bold and courageous, enabling you to be able to land that job at that particular level. Because I'm sure you were probably the youngest person they ever had at that point in time, right?
Was.
And when you put your name forward or put yourself forward to actually go for those certifications, did they actually believe that you would do it?
Yes. And I think this is something that I've rediscovered now, but I already possessed over time. And that was my ability to be very convincing. I had this thing where people wanted me to be right about whatever I said I was going to do. And so I had this kind of, there was this goodwill that I could develop with people, and the people wanted to take a chance on me. And that's one of the times that I used it.
So now you're in insurance game. Now you're 16. You're thinking this is just going to be a year before you eventually go to college. But it turns out you turn it into actual career for a while before moving into the investment banking and wealth management side of things. Why did you decide to stay there longer than that year then?
The money.
Fair enough.
No, and I say this with the context that so for my age, I was making a lot of money, and I think that there was something there where I realized that for the first time, again, the sense of being in control of what happens next, right? So I could now decide that with this work or with this financial freedom that I was creating for myself, I could now dictate what my next steps were. So it wasn't going to be dictated for me. So it gave me room to explore. It opened up my mind to the possibilities other than just going to school. And so I used that time to really become better, And I stayed there for a little bit longer than a year before I went for my first banking job, because I felt like, okay, now I need to challenge myself more, because if I can do this, now I've gotten kind of the most basic certificates I needed. What else can I do? Like, I was in that mode. So this was mostly a remote job where people would call in for insurance advice and you do the video calls and all of that. I didn't have to go to people's houses or see them physically. And I was like, I want to get out of this kind of box that I've put myself in, where I'm only good at speaking to people on the phone because I'm introverted. And I want to see if I can do this face to face, because I know I'm good at this. And at the time, face to face jobs in banking and insurance were much more high paying than the ones on the phone. So I told myself, hey, not just for the money, but to challenge myself to get out of my comfort zone, see how far I could stretch myself. How far can I take this thing? So then I applied to work in a bank, and become a financial advisor.
So you start doing that, and you do that really, really well, working for some amazing organizations. And then you decide to, I'm going to say, quit and move to Dubai. When things are going really, really well, why decide to just abruptly, so it looks like when I'm reading stuff about you, like, it's like very abruptly, like, I'm going to move to Dubai and do something very, very
Shifting
different.
around it. You know what? I feel like there's also a bit of a lot of random in my story, in a way that I was very naive. And I think that naivety helps me to make big decisions, before I realized how big they were. So, but at the time, and again, I'm very young, right? And so I've done all of these things in a very short period of time. I moved from financial advising. Now I'm all going into investment banking with another multinational bank. And I'm like, this is going really fast. I'm now realizing this, right? I'm looking around me, my colleagues, they're here, they worked up to this day, this level in their career, and they're like in their 50s, and I'm here and I'm early 20s. And I'm like, there was something off there. Not, and I mean, no disrespect to the people that were sitting there, but more, I felt like, hey, it was becoming so linear without me having actually decided that this is the way I want to go. Because I really started rolling into these new roles and positions, but I hadn't decided for myself what I really wanted to be. It was just the next opportunity and the next opportunity, and I just went for it. So I went on holiday in Dubai, actually, whilst I was working at the last bank I was working at. And they were paying for my college. So I was going to work Monday to Friday, and then I was going to college on Saturday. And so I was doing business administration. And I remember I was so frustrated with the fact that I was learning all of these things to obtain a degree, to obtain a job that I already have. That's how I saw it. So now I'm like, wait, I'm really going to do 4 years of this, get one degree, and then hang it in the wall and go back to the job that I'm already doing. Like, how is this helping me? Because this was not going to give me anything up, right? It wasn't something that was going to help me get a promotion. I was already at the level where I needed to have that degree, but I didn't. And I was still doing the job really well. So in the Netherlands, you have this system where you can do the first year, complete the first year, and then you can decide if you want to do the full course. And otherwise, you get a small certificate showing that you did the first year. So I said, hey, I'm going to think about if I want to do this while I'm in Dubai. And so I go on holiday, and I was so impressed, not by the glitter and glamour, but by the innovation. Just the sheer boldness of the government saying, you know what, we're going to build the tallest building in the world. Let's see, right? And you know what, we're going to do the entire government digitally. And there were just so many things that were happening at the time. This is 2013, 2014, that were so new. And I felt like, this is the kind of environment I want to be in. Because in the Netherlands is significantly smaller than the UK. We're only 18 million people. And there's also this mindset, this oftentimes very narrow-minded, very and yeah, tends to keep you small if you don't take time. And so we actually have a saying here, and I'll translate it into Dutch English freely, but it says, act normal, then you're already acting crazy enough. That's literally what that describes the culture here. Like, acting normal is already crazy enough. That's what they say. That's also how they move, right? It's a cultural thing. Don't be too out there. Don't think too big. Just be okay, right? And so coming from that environment and then going to Dubai, where it's like nothing is crazy, that was it. That space, the space where I was in, where I was about to make a big decision about whether or not I'm going to focus on doing something in school and maybe another career path towards management. It was an interesting place to be. So I made a bet, and I said, some people said, if I can get a job here, I'm staying. And then I just applied for jobs throughout the period of time that I was on holiday, and ended up working there for over 3 years.
So if I jump into that career and you betting on yourself, you just basically said there are people who are in their roles and they're in their 50s, and you're in your early 20s and you're doing exactly the same thing that they're doing, and you also don't have a degree. So someone's listening to that and it's like, Kimberly, wow, what was it that you were doing that helped you to navigate to those senior positions very, very quickly? Because you can like, yeah, one thing came up after the other, but you must have been doing something right for those roles to be coming up to allow you to elevate so quickly, and not necessarily having the degree, the education in a sense that the other people had as well. So you already were behind the 8 ball, yet your career is very accelerated.
I now know that it was incredibly hard work, right? I was overcompensating for the fact that I didn't have a degree. And so I would make sure that I knew everything better than anybody else. So if you gave me a book, I had read the book 3 times. And I would have also looked up other sources, right? So there was something there for me to kind of be incredibly well prepared for the roles that I was taking in, and making sure that I was executing them almost to perfection. And obviously, I'm overstating this, but it's more so about really putting my backing up my words, because a lot of the times I talked myself into these roles, right? People liked my personality, so I already had that. People liked, there was something about me that people felt like, oh, there's something about her that is intriguing, that's interesting. And I would leverage that kind of favorable viewpoint that they had of me to then also propose things that were sometimes bold, like, maybe I can do this job. And then them thinking about opportunities to help me get there, right? So a lot of it was getting the right certificates when everybody else was kind of just doing their thing. I was getting the extra certificates, and I wasn't sleeping and doing studying and right getting certified for these things. So that when I do come up and ask you, I'm not just asking you to do me a favor. I'm asking you to take a chance, but I'm already qualified on paper. The one thing that I never had was the degree, but that didn't matter at the time because I had already been showing them that I was able to do the work.
Okay. So it's being bold, being courageous, being audacious, but also leveraging things like your personality and not focusing on what you didn't have, or focusing on what you do have to help you to kind of get to where you want to get to.
And then get your hands on the tools that you need, right? There's this thing about, nobody, like I said, gave me anything. I worked really hard to make sure that I did qualify on the things that mattered. And so I made having a bachelor's degree irrelevant, because are you going to choose somebody who just finished university and you still need to train for a year? Or are you going to take somebody who can actually do the job and do it well, but doesn't have the bachelor degree? Business wise, you're going to choose you're going to choose me, because I'm immediately going to make you money.
So now you've bet on yourself, you've moved to Dubai, you're in a city and a place that's innovative and things are much larger than the Netherlands does. You're in your element, your environment. and you're in a dream job for a while, which also turns out to be a very pivotal change in your career. What happened?
That I left Dubai.
No, when you were in Dubai and in that role,
Okay,
how
what
was that
happened?
experience for you?
Right.
Yeah.
You know what? There's so many layers to that story, and we won't have enough time. But from the moment I decided to be there, there were these hurdles that anybody would have probably left very much before the end of that 3 years. And I went there, for instance, with the promise of a job that came with a house and with a car, with all of these things, amazing opportunity, only to land there and then them saying, "Oh shoot, they didn't call you. We're actually no longer fulfilling the role here." Uh, on my first working
Oh,
day. Like I went through those kind of things where I gave up my house and I said my goodbyes. My mother called the entire country that her daughter's moving to Dubai. And then I land there and my job is non-existent actually. And this is a large listed company, right? So this is not a small boutique agency. This was a very big company that hired me. I went through 6 interview stages. This was not a small deal. And they just forgot to tell me over the weekend that, and these were exceptional circumstances. I'm not going to mention the name of the company, but the person who hired me, I was supposed to replace her as a business manager. But she hadn't told them that she was also intending to quit. And so they thought they now had really two powerful people on that post. When she had it in her notice, because I was hired, they were like, well, then we're not doing the whole thing. And so it was exceptional circumstances. But obviously for me, that meant that first Sunday, which is the first working day in Dubai, I stepped out of the taxi as quickly as I went back in, because and we walked together to the ATM and she gave me my 1 month advance in cash and I went back to my hotel that I quickly checked out of because that was too expensive now.
what a
Yeah,
welcome.
that was my welcome. So yeah, and there were, it took me quite some time, few months to actually secure another job. I could have gone back to the Netherlands to say, hey, I tried, but it didn't feel right at the time to give up after I kind of put my mind to it. And I really already grew in that period of time because I had to learn how to be vulnerable and start asking for help. Where I was up until that point, the person who figured everything out. To my family, to my friends, I was the success story. And now I had to kind of show up and say, things didn't work out. And I need help. And I'm actually not okay. And I'm struggling. Right. And so that really kind of taught me a different side of me, showed me a different side of me, but also taught me the power of being vulnerable. Because once I did start asking for help, and it took me a long time to get past my ego, I finally started to get people to help me out and connect me within the network in Dubai that actually helped me to land a job. And it was actually, well, they're not paying for it me for it yet, but it was actually LinkedIn at the time. That wasn't a big deal, but they were already using LinkedIn a lot. So I started to build my LinkedIn profile and then connected with people who were expats. And this is how I ended up landing the position that I stuck with for some time.
Oh, that's amazing. That's it's an amazing story of growth as well. Because nothing worse than I'm leaving, I'm gonna do this, got an amazing role, and then it doesn't happen. The feeling of, I guess, shame, failure, all those different elements can easily bubble up and take over. And learning to be able to be like, okay, you know what, that happens, and yes, you can feel those things, but not sit in it too long, but instead start to do something. And I guess I love when you said that. You know what? I said to myself, no, this is what I said I wanted to do. So even having that anchor thought, that anchor thing that holds you down, like this is for me. This is not about anyone else. This is. I said I want to try and figure this out. I'm going to try and figure this out. If that means I need to eat some humble pie and let people know and get some help, that's fine. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes for me to try and make this a success. And you obviously did, and you landed a job after a couple of months, and that went really, really well until you had an incident at work, which kind of changed the whole environment for you, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think this was one of the things that was also it was a cultural thing where even though you're in this very interesting environment that culturally is very Mediterranean, but also very international, also very American. So there's this crazy mix of work environment that you're in. Um, and I came in with, well, the Dutch call it their Dutch sobriety, right? Where you're kind of neutral, you don't show too much force, and but you do your work well. And I had always been that person who then did my work a little bit better than expected, and that was noticed, right? So um, I think that especially in the beginning, my advantage was again was that I was underestimated a lot. So at the time, I still did not have a degree. I had now done several short-term university courses that I was doing, but I still have a full 4-year degree. I remember I was about to enroll for executive MBA at the time with that role in Dubai. But I remember so vividly the day when the director of the company came to me and he was like, I really like you. I like the way you handle clients. I like the way you navigate the business. I like the way, he was giving me some props. I was like, oh, that's nice. And then my supervisor came up to me, I think a few days later, and he's like, hey, don't you want to kind of do something with large accounts and all of that? I was like, yeah, sure, why not? And yeah, became quite successful. That I was incredibly insecure to be moved up to that level with people who I felt had really earned their stripes. But I did fairly well there. I think that for somebody who didn't have the loads of experience that I had in a short period of time, I was able to show that I belonged on that department as well. And then I made a mistake. And I made a mistake with an account that wasn't a major account, but I was on a large account department. So we had this weekly meetings where the CEO would also sit in for on that level of deals. And so I told them, and it was in hindsight, if I was as mature and bold as I was today, I would have probably also known that this wasn't as big of a deal. But at the time, I already felt like this was huge for me to have this responsibility, and I wanted to make sure that I was transparent and I was doing things right. So long story short, I laid it on the table, told them what was what. Um, it could be easily fixed, but I wanted to check with the team so that I wasn't um, forgetting anything or had any blind spots before we kind of proposed the solution to the client. And that was something that backfired heavily, where the CEO kind of didn't in the meeting. He was kind of harsh and yeah, not very nice. But afterwards, the repercussions were even worse, where my manager now put me on some kind of administrative checks, and like anything that I did with any account now needed to be double checked by and that was very humiliating by another a colleague of mine, right? And so I didn't have the freedom to now do the things that I was good at, only because I confessed on making one mistake and I was trying to get everybody's input to help. So that was a very rough period for me because obviously you can imagine, in an environment where there's a lot of high stakes, it's a lot of ego going around. It was also my ego being damaged at the time, right? But more so personally, I felt like it was unjust, right? And you feel like you put so much effort into doing things right. I knew I worked incredibly hard for that company up until that time, and I had the receipts. And this is kind of how quickly people can now find you invaluable or less valuable. And that hit home for me, that part where I felt like, wow. So it doesn't really matter how good I am or how many millions you bring in. It can change any day at will. And I just learned very early that my time could also be just any time. So I ended up quitting that job after a few months of really being disrespected in the not feeling welcome, and also just not, I think, understanding that I wasn't actually working in a very healthy environment at all.
It takes incidents like that to shake us up and remind us who we are, because even to your point, I know you didn't mention it, but you talk about you have the receipts. You won the firm's highest performance. You broke records. You set a brand new standard in that space. So it wasn't just yeah, I did well. Like you were smashing it. You were doing incredibly well. And for the one incident to be the cause of that shift and that change in the way that they looked at you and treated you, which is ridiculously harsh, as you said. But even that point you just made right now around it, it made you see that actually you were working incredibly hard, and actually that environment that you were in wasn't healthy for you. And there are times when, because of what we're doing, everything's going great, we don't see what's in front of us. And it takes things like that to be able to break us out of the matrix, in a sense, and let our eyes be really, really open to like, oh no, that's not good. That's not really good for me, and I can't sustain this for the long term as well.
True.
So when you left and walked away, and I'm guessing that's when you had the sense of, I don't really want to work for anyone else anymore. I've been there, done this since I'm 16, different countries, different spaces. I wanna do me. Was that where that thought kind of came from for you?
Well, it wasn't immediate, right? Because, um, but it was something that happened over time. I did know I was not going to go back to an environment where I would have to prove myself again in this way. So I knew that. And I didn't know if it was going to be not working for a job, but I felt like I need to find a place or a way to go back to where I feel empowered most, and where I'm in my strength. And I knew that it was going to be something completely different from the kind of the path I had been going on thus far. And so I remember, traveling up and down. I was going to Ghana up and down a lot. So I was getting more and more involved, for holidays and other purposes. And I was getting more and more involved with kind of the technological advancement that were happening there, especially, startups being built, um, solving really crucial problems on the African continent as a whole. And I remember that kind of, triggering my interest and finding out, hey, and thinking, is entrepreneurship maybe something of interest to me? Can I also build to make impact? Because I was also at that time then looking for purpose, right? It was this heightened awareness of what am I doing and why am I here and what is my role? And all of these questions started to come up. And one thing that I didn't mention was that at age 16, what also kind of shaped me a lot was the first time. That was also the first time I went to Ghana for the first time on my own. I had gone as a child one time that I don't remember much of, but I was 16 when I decided I want to really meet my family. I want to understand the culture more. I was really raised with the Suriname culture and the Dutch culture, less with the Ghanaian side. And so I went there. I went to live with my grandmother for 3 months. And I remember one of the things that really stood out for me was this. It was the first day that I was in Ghana. And throughout the day, I was just in full amazement. And it was because for the first time in my life, I knew what it felt like to be part of the norm. I had never, up until that day, realized that I was always very painfully aware that I was different from the people around me. And there's a certain guard that you have up, and it's a certain always being switched on that comes with it. It's a certain emotional labor that comes with it. And for the first time, I was in a country, in a place where I could look around and the police officer, the doctor, the driver, the pharmacist, everybody looked like me, and my shoulders just dropped. And the shoulders dropped, but I never knew they were up in the first place. Right? So I was constantly living with this weight on my shoulder and like the tension of not quite fitting in, being enough, having to be abnormal. And here I could actually be a mediocre Black girl. Right? And it was so nice to just be in an environment where nobody knew who I was and they really didn't care. Right? It was that kind of release of, wow, I don't have to put out a facade. I don't have to walk straight up because there's a bunch of people going to look at me like, why are you here? I knew that everybody was there in their own right, minding their own business, and I was going to do the same. Right. And so that really kind of reminded me when I years later then left that job. And I was like, wait a minute. Again, I put myself in this position where I'm constantly having to be switched on and prove myself to others. But what am I trying to prove? And who am I really to be proving? What am I proving? So that's the long version to your question. Well, the trigger to entrepreneurship really came, I think, a year or so later. I ended up traveling a bit and then I landed in Spain, which was semi-random, but it was really because I wanted to move closer to my family here in the Netherlands, but I didn't want to lose the sunshine and the lifestyle of being at the beach. And Marbella seemed like the place to do that.
The part is right.
I always try to find a way to make it sound more strategic, but it really wasn't. So yeah, I landed there. I figured, at least it's going to be in line with the kind of lifestyle I'm hoping to have here, which is a bit more slow paced, like really intense, high paced environment in Dubai to now kind of going here where there's still sunshine. People like to smile. They like to be outside. There's good food. We have siestas. It was like, for me, it was going to be a temporary dream to just kind of unwind and figure out what I wanted to do. So I moved to Marbella. And then I realized quickly, yeah, I had some money because obviously Dubai does pay very well, tax free. I had some money so I could sustain myself for some time. That I do need to start looking for a job. Uh, and so I ended up realizing, strategically, not the best place to move somebody with an investment banking / oil and gas background to a small village where they have like 3 shops to find a job, right? So I ended up having to think outside the box again. And then the world of internet kind of opened doors for me. So fast forward, I started going into these expat networks and kind of doing my research, finding out what is out there. I realized if I really was going to work at the level that I was wanting to work at, I needed to go back to the city, either to Madrid or Barcelona, and get one of these multinational jobs. And this is something that I really wasn't looking forward to. So I was starting to look into maybe I could do some freelancing work. One thing led to another where I met a bunch of expats who were kind of in a similar space. I was like, hey, how come there's not a platform or way for us to easily connect with jobs that match our skills? And here I got into kind of the skills-based industry. And I built a platform. I built a platform that automatically match skills with vacancies. There was an algorithm behind it. I didn't have a technical background, but YouTube University and Google University helped me out a lot. I used Code Academy. Again, they're not paying me to kind of learn the basics of how to build something like that. And then I hired people with actual technical skills to build the algorithm. And I'm skipping over a lot of steps of how to do this, right? But I then launched that platform and it grew to the level where it was noticed by larger recruitment agencies, and one of them decided to be quick with it and bought the platform.
You've gone from living in Spain by the beach to finding a need, but also knowing that actually you didn't want to go into a job in corporate Madrid, but finding a need or a niche, should I say, and building that out. And then now you sold it. And then when people tend to sell companies, sometimes it's like, okay, now Kimberly, you can breathe. You've done something amazing. You've gone into entrepreneurship. You've been successful and sold a company, which not a lot of people can say they've done. That's good. That's good success. Relax. you decide, nah, I'm not content. I'm gonna go again.
Yeah. Um, and I think this is so important because I now navigate very deeply in the startup ecosystem. So I can say this, that, selling a company is not an accomplishment in and of itself, right? And I really want us to stop talking about it like it is. People sell their companies every day for different reasons. Some companies get sold with a loss, some with profit, some under really harsh conditions. Like a lot of founders walk away with no money at all because of the shares that they don't own. There's a lot of things to this, right? So just hearing somebody say they sold the company is not a reason to applaud them, I think, unless they tell you they're proud of it and they're happy with the results. I wouldn't kind of put people on a pedestal like that. So yes, I sold the company, but I sold it not knowing the value that I really had, right? I was new to this. I was incredibly naive. So, yes, I could have sold it for a lot more. I could have probably sat with it longer and built it more substantially and then sold it a lot more, or maybe kept it. I don't know. There's a lot of things there about, just the selling part. I think the biggest thing that I'm proud of is that I learned very early on to translate data and information into value and be able to package that in a proposition that people will want to buy. And this was both the consumers that were using it and the companies that were using it, and to the level of a company actually wanting to pay for it, right? So I'm very good at making sure that I can show value and I can translate that in a way that other people can understand and see that. So I can build strong propositions, even if I underestimate what I'm sitting on, right? So for me, it wasn't necessarily that I said, hey, I'm not content. I want to do something more. But it was more like I got curious. I was like, this tech thing is cool. Like this technology thing, right? And you can build all of these things, and I don't even have to be a coder. Like that actually blew my mind. Like, how am I selling a technology-based company and I can't code? Like that to me was the biggest kind of, you know. So I was like, wait, so there's a whole different way you can go about this. Like I can have the business mindset and the kind of the value proposition thing going. I know all of these other elements that maybe a technical person won't have. And then we can complement each other and I can still build something of value. So that made me want to build more and more platforms, which I did. I went ham. I went crazy. I built a bunch of platforms that nobody was waiting for. So they failed dramatically. But in that process, I learned so much about, okay, what is the right order of things, right? You know, validating your assumptions, really looking for a problem that's worth solving, really finding product market fit, finding scalability early on. All of these questions with every failed platform that I did, I learned all of these things as I was going until the last platform I did sell that was quite successful.
Think I love the reminder that you actually called me up on, which is really good. I said it tongue in cheek. There are a lot of times people hear someone sold, and it's always that someone sold, their life is made up, everything's perfect. But actually, like, no, there are a lot of people. I've listened to one of my first favorite podcasts is First Millionaires, and they talk a lot of times around people who sold for billions, and yet the amount that they take away is not that much. And he's like, how's that possible? It's down to how, like you said, the experience, the equity that they have in the business, how much VC investment, all those different elements that are laid on top that you just don't see. But being able to take that learning from the first one and then move it into something new. Yes, you did multiple ones, but they have another one that you're able to sell. So I guess for us to then ask you that question that you give back to me, when you saw the second one, were you happy with it all? Did you take in the learning of the lessons the first time around? How was it for you?
It wouldn't be my life if there wasn't some drama attached to that, right? So, no, because now I think I'm older, I'm wiser. And then I'm like, I'm going in with a lawyer, I'm going in knowing that what I want out of this deal, because the first one, they just kind of sprung on me. I didn't even know I could sell my company. The second one, I am highly aware that this could happen, but I wasn't searching, right? And so I was in a space where the platform was growing big in terms of numbers, a number of people using it. And I'd monetized it. It was a digital platform for African entrepreneurs to connect online. And then there was also a portal for investors to now find startups in the African continent to perhaps invest in. And so that platform, while still figuring out what was really the core value, it had a subscription at the end where the founders could pay to use the platform, and be collaborating online, very small amount. But then the investor side was kind of the biggest one where they were learning about what's happening in Africa. But the I was still doing most of it alone on a strategic level. So I built this technical team around me. I had learned how to do that now. What I didn't learn early enough is that if I wanted to scale, I was going to have to have some people at a more strategic level who are also outside of the operation building the business around it. And I was doing it alone. I think my private circumstances also made it incredibly difficult for me now to balance that alone. And so it led me to be open to have conversations with investors who were saying, hey, we're wanting to help you grow. So it wasn't about the money. It was really about, or even selling at the time, it was about them bringing in something that I didn't have, which was capacity, which was resources, experience, all of these things. So really attracting smart capital is what I thought I was going to get. So that deal went very differently than I would have wanted it to go, actually. So and there's a ton of stories like mine, but for me it was new. How this investor I was actually sent to me by a competitor, an American competitor, to buy the platform and to extract whatever was out of it and then bury it. And that's really what happened. So I sold the company under the pretense that we were going to build and scale this together. And so you can imagine if you take a deal like this, and I think this is very important for those who are either entrepreneurs or things like that, to really dig into, there's only so many things you can read out on paper, right? But what is the intent of the organization that is trying to buy you, right? What is it that they're really after? Do you understand the value of your company well enough to know what's the question behind the question, right? And so, and have you built in enough kind of walls and security to make sure that the platform is not as valuable without either you or some of the things that are in your IP that they will not have access to, right? So there's all of these things that I thought I knew about this deal. One of the things was I was going to build it together with them. So I wasn't actually selling the entire company to them. I was taking some cash up front and we were going to keep the shares for, when the company actually does scale dramatically, then I can actually start making some more money of the shares I still owned, not knowing that they were not planning for the company to grow anything more than that. So the shares were worthless by the time they were done with me. So I think that there's a lot to say about, really watching who you do business with, but also understanding why you're going into the deals that you're going into, right? So for me, I think that if I wasn't in that kind of time crunch and felt really desperate for help, I probably would have asked different questions. So your state of mind also really matters in that. And again, if you had a partner or somebody who's looking at with the glass skin in the game, they will also be asking different questions, right? And so there's probably not a lot. If I look at what my legal team also said that I could have known beforehand, but there's also something there in terms of intuition that usually plays a part where you're like, why are they trying to move so fast? And why, right? Like, so there's certain things that could have informed me about that. So I feel like I'm incredibly proud in hindsight that a bigger player felt so threatened by me that they thought they were going to spend money to get me out of the way. I know Amazon does that every day, but to me it was a big deal. I feel at the same time, that put me in a position where I had now learned so much. I had to give back, right, to founders who were going to go into the same path, perhaps bootstrap their companies to a certain level and then need help. And then the only way shouldn't be prying, well, people who are not honest about their intentions.
Interesting. Just this morning, I was went out for a run. I was coming back, and I recorded a video, and I was talking about a number of conversations I've had this week, in particular, around entrepreneurship and how tough it can be. That a lot of time it is glamorized, but actually the reality is you would get sometimes hours, days, weeks, or longer, where it just feels like you're just stuck. And it feels like nothing is moving forward. It seems like you can't absolutely catch a break. And there are times when it's good to be able to tap into that, to be like, do I still want to keep on doing this? If the answer is yes, then there are ways to proceed. The answer is no. It's also okay to know when to bow out and go and do something completely different, or step back into the corporate life, whatever, because that's the reality of it. And I love how you're, in a sense, doing that with what you do now with like Ofori and Company, for example, where you can work with tech startups and you can teach them a lot of the lessons that you've learned to ensure that they don't go through the same thing that you've gone through. Obviously, with the funds that you sit in as well, I think you've got Future Ventures Fund that you've created, as well, advisory boards. This knowledge that you have and the experiences that you have had are so critical for people to learn more about. Because I think these are the stories that you don't hear about. You hear more about the unicorns, or someone's, I don't know, gone on Shark Tank and got a Zoom deal and is blown up. And all that's the glamorized side. Well, that's like far and few between. The reality is there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes. There are a lot of people out there who are also crooks and charlatans. But learning how to be able to tap in experience from people like you to navigate better, to think differently, to ask different questions. And to that point you made, I think is critical. What's the intention behind this? The money might be nice, but are we actually aligned as to what we're trying to do, what we're trying to build, what we're trying to create? Because if you're not, it's not going to make a difference. So that's such a pivotal point.
Yeah, I think, and I love that you're touching on this, because this is somebody pointed out to me the other day that the word intentional is kind of my trademark, become part of my trademark. But yeah, with what intent do you do anything, right? And I find that incredibly important. But then also, when you do, how can you be intentional about it? And I think that there's so much more need for us to think through why we do what we do and what impact it will have, um, than anything else in the world today. Because we live in a world where anything can be created. We can do and be. We truly can and be anything. I think the biggest challenge for us is we're going to have to decide, why. Why do you want to do that? Why does it need to be there? And what is going to be the impact, whether it is in your work, whether it is the companies that you're building, whether it is the kind of podcast conversations you're having. Why do you do the things that you do? And how is it going to translate into the future? What impact is it going to have? Is it going to have a positive impact? Is it going to have the impact that you intended it to have? And if not, you have the power to control that narrative, and you influence that. And I teach that to companies as well. There's no such thing as building a product or a service that you do not control what the impact is. You do all the time. Whether the impact that comes, whether the results are what you hoped it would be, or they're less favorable than you thought it would be, that's still something that is in the span of your control, because you can change that. You're the one who built it. You're the one who can change it. You're the one who can change the way that it operates. You're the one that can change perhaps what you offer in the first place, who you offer it to. There's a lot of kind of steps that you can take before we get to the level of you saying, this is out of my hands, right? And so I really train organizations and leaders to take leadership, in their leadership, right? Take ownership, be intentional, take responsibility for the things that you're putting out into the world. And this also means in the way that you work with your team, right? The culture that is in your organization, that's you. You did that. You can change it, but don't say it's not you, right? So it always starts with kind of, yes, your intent matters, but then also be intentional about how you're going to navigate that space. And so if you know that you intended your organization to be, free and creative and innovative and people feel at home and feel safe, and you're not seeing that, then you have to be intentional about building solutions and building an environment that does facilitate that. And that's in the span of control that you have. And I think that if we kind of detach ourselves from what we are being taught in business schools and all of these things about a process is a process, and we go back to the fact that remains that business is always going to be human as long as human beings are paying for things, then we have to really think about how we're going to position ourselves when we make decisions and think through. We can't just say that we're doing things because that's how we were taught to do them.
How do you define leadership?
I don't have a definition for leadership. I do think that on a personal level, personal leadership, it means that you're moving with conviction. And it means that you stand for something and you act upon that. And I think that in business, that is not very far apart. But I also think that your span of influence and who it influences is becomes critically more important sometimes. Not all the time, because obviously if you have family around you, your personal leadership and the way you lead yourself and the things you do also matter. But if you're leading an organization with the size of the companies that I usually work with, they're in that transition space where they're like a little under 100 people or more, then you start noticing that the things that you do or fail to do will have impact either way. And so leadership is about choosing one or the other, but then standing by that.
And with organizations that you work with now, as well as your experience previously, when you think about the future, what is, kind of say, what is next for you, or what is the legacy that you want out there for you when you think about your impact?
You know what? I've been thinking about that a lot. I think I'm again in this kind of cycle where I'm like, okay, what am I doing? Why am I here? What is the impact that I'm looking to have? And I think I'm getting closer and closer to what that would mean for me now. And that is really to play a very pivotal role in what the future is going to look like when it comes to business. So, what kind of businesses are we creating that our children are going to be using? And what kind of organizations are we going to lead and run? And what kind of solutions have we not solved that require solving? I want to be part of kind of answering some of these questions. And hopefully, a lot of those answers are going to have positive outcomes. And I want to do that through working with the right companies. So, really, companies who also believe that it really matters, that what they put out there matters for the future in a positive way. But I also want to do that in terms of who leads those companies, right? Having more people who have a perspective on life that is going to be valuable to us for later on. Who have a different perspective on life, who are big thinkers, who are innovators, who are creators, who dare to dream, who dare to do things differently. I want to see them more in leadership. A lot of the times, those are women. But also being part of the conversation where we look at what even does education look like, like questions like this, right? This has been a very important topic in my journey, right? How can we make sure that with all the technologies that's coming out in the world today, um, we leverage that in a way that we can be prepared, one, but also use that to our advantage, right? What are we teaching our children? Are we teaching them to be part of a society that is already broken, of an economical system that's already broken, that has time and time again showed us it doesn't actually work? Or are we going to train our kids to think critically about what a new world would look like? That's what I mean with education. You know, what are we training them to on critical thinking? Are we training them what kind of tools they can be using? Are we training them to have a wider view of what different societies and ecosystems look like? You know, how do they do things in certain villages and tribes and they're self-sustaining, right? I always say this in the Netherlands, we have this huge topic on the agenda on circularity. And I'm like, Africa's been circular. Go look, right? We've been circular, right?
Been there,
Like
we've been going through this.
we do this. Like, come hire us. You don't need any fancy investment there on some platform. Like we've been doing it. Like I've been wearing my brother's shoes. Like it's fine. So there's so many things that we can learn from each other. And kind of how can we prepare and open up the minds of our young ones to make sure that they're ready to kind of take the world head on like that. That's the kind of role I want to play. So in business and society, but also looking to the future for our kids.
And based on the randomness of your journey, which is also super inspiring, um, I believe you actually do it because I think there's something around purpose. When you get hold of purpose, you hold on to it really, really tight, and it now becomes, how do I figure this out to make this a reality? And loving I think as much as it's funny around the randomness of your story, I think there's something around that also points out the fact that actually life is not linear. And there's so many ups and downs and ebbs and flows that we go through, which actually lead us to where we really need to be and where we want to be doing. So stepping away from the linear and leaning into even what you described, some of that purpose around even what we want for our kids, think differently. Like critical thinking means that you're not looking at A, B, C, or 1+1=2. It's there are different ways of being able to arrive at that point. How do you step outside of the box that education might put you in or society might put you in? And you look at, actually, that's what I'm trying to get to. What are the different ways I can loop around like a roller coaster and kind of get there? That's what you kind of want to put out in life, which can be fun most of the time, can also be painful. Just say, like, people should recognize that fact as well, which your story really, really speaks to. And that's why I really want us just to delve into that. And I appreciate you sharing that journey because there's so many things that people don't see, that don't know, that don't understand, and they just see the highlight reels. Whereas this is the reality of what that looks like. And the more that you learn, the more you can grow, and hopefully the more you don't either repeat the same mistakes other people did, but utilize their journey to help you to still achieve what you want to do. So thank you very much for just coming on and sharing your story, Kimberly.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I think one last thought that came to mind is kind of what we started off with about, kind of what kind of person you are, the different layers to you as a person. I think that if we can all learn and embrace to be comfortable with the fact that we are all layered and we all have different elements to us that are of value and that can be of value in different situations and different environments, I think we have something really powerful in our hands, right? And I embrace my creativity when I'm looking at financial reports with technical companies, um, almost as much as I do that when I'm composing a song, right? And so there's this unlocking of our mind of what is appropriate and what should be, that I hope that we can move more towards. Because I think if we can all move more freely and be our full selves, there's, I think, an incredible wealth of knowledge and just value that will be released into the world, and then I hopefully can build a society that we actually want to live in.
It's the one question I'm going to ask you on that then. We didn't touch on it, but do you still sing?
Yes, and I'm not gonna.
I was curious, like, you still sing that, man? Okay. It's good to know. I'm gonna go YouTube hunting and find something. All right.
This before YouTube, but go ahead.
Okay, Kimberly, it's been an absolute pleasure. This is Everyday Leadership. We will see you all next week.